In this video today, I want to share 5 things I do whenever I get overwhelmed. The reason why I'm making this is because I've been overwhelmed recently. And with overwhelm, if you stay in the state of overwhelm for too long, it can create a lot of distress and it really affects how you perform in your day-to-day life. You can't think clearly, and typically because of that lack of sort of executive function, a lack of thinking clearly and objectively, typically you fall down a slippery slope and you can't really perform, like say your job as effectively as you usually do. You struggle to interact with other people in the day-to-day, and other stressors, when they come in, it tends to cripple you. It tends to affect you more than it usually would. And so overwhelm been really affecting me. And the thing I found with overwhelm is it's typically like a big to-do list in your head. There's just loads of things going on, and there's loads of things you've got to do, you should do, you have to do, and it's just sort of like stacking up, and you really experience that peak level of overwhelm when it's like the straw on the camel's back. It's just like another thing on your plate, and you just sort of feel incapacitated. And that's sort of been me recently. And so I just want to share 5 things which have really helped me to basically reduce distress, to help me think more clearly and actually get on with doing those things. Because when you're not thinking clearly, when you're stressed, it's really hard to actually tackle those things. But I found these 5 tips have just really helped me with actually just getting shit done and actually feeling better and moving forward and going after the goals and dreams in my life rather than trying to put out fires. So, tip number 1 is whenever I'm in that peak state of overwhelm and my mind is just racing, the first thing I do is I do breathing exercises. And there's lots of different breathing techniques out there. What I do is something I've learned is called box breathing, I believe. I call it 5 rounds of 5 breathing. And all you basically do is you stabilize your breathing. So whenever you're stressed, whenever you're overwhelmed, whenever you're anxious, typically we start to hyperventilate. And it's like mouth breathing, right? And so your mind typically follows your breath. So when your breathing is erratic, your mind's erratic. But also what's really cool is when you stabilize your breath, you also stabilize your mind. And so whenever you basically do even breathing, and so there's 5 rounds of 5 breathing, what I basically do is I close my mouth and I breathe through my nose. This activates what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is basically associated with calming down, relaxing, digesting, all that kind of stuff, repairing your body. And basically I breathe through my nose and I do a 5 count on an inhale. So I go, and then I do a 5-second hold. Then I do a 5-second exhale through my nose. Then a 5-second hold. And I repeat. And I'll typically do that 5 times because that's just enough for me to just really calm down. On my Fitbit, it tracks my heart rate. And oftentimes when I do this, I'll see my heart rate plummet down. It's racing. And basically when I get through this exercise, my heart rate is dramatically lower. So there's actually a physiological response when you slow down and calm down and equalize your breathing. So basically, you can either do 5 rounds of this breathing, or you can just go for 5 minutes. Just keep doing 5 inhale, 5 hold, 5 exhale, 5 hold, and just keep doing that until you feel calmer. And you will feel calmer. This is the fastest way to calm yourself down whenever you're feeling overwhelmed or anxious or panicked. It's just like an instant result. And so that's the first thing I do is I calm down my mind by calming down my breathing. Once I've done that, the second thing I do is I get a pen and paper and I do what's called a brain dump. Because the reason why I'm overwhelmed is because there's lots of things on my mind. And basically what I'm trying to do is like, I'm thinking like I've got to do all these things now. All these things have to be done right now. And, it's kind of like trying to eat an elephant. When you're trying to eat an elephant, if you try to eat it in one massive go, one sitting, of course you're going to get overwhelmed because it's impossible. and you'll just sort of freeze and you'll be like, ugh, because the task in front of you is just impossible. And it's kind of like that when you've got all these tasks in your mind and they're clumped into one big sort of piece of shit in your mind. Of course you're going to get overwhelmed, and of course you're going to freeze and procrastinate because it's just too much to do at once. But if you basically chunk it all down like an elephant, if you chunked up an elephant and you're like, I'm just going to do one bite at a time, you're going to be a lot more likely to take action on that because it's less overwhelming, just one piece at a time, and pace yourself. And so that's the same thing with our tasks, because there are some things which we perceive to be immediate and things we've got to do sooner rather than later. But there's a lot of things which will be on your mind when you're overwhelmed, which don't even have to be done for the next few days or weeks or months, or, you might even have to do them. And so what I found is to be really effective is just getting everything and, leave no stone unturned. Everything, get it out of your mind onto pen and pad. And some prompts I love for myself is I just ask the question, what's on my mind? And then just whatever's on my mind, I'll write it out. And then the next question I ask is, and what else? And what else? And what else? What else is on my mind? And I just keep doing that, keep doing that, keep doing that. And it doesn't matter what it is. It could be a to-do list. It could also just be something what happened to you, the other day, or the other week, which has just been occupying space and time in your mind. It's just whatever's been on your mind recently, just get it out onto paper. And just by having it all out there in front of you, it's not in here anymore. It's not occupying space and time anymore. It's on the pad. And you're going to do something about it or get to it. And just the fact of getting it out of your mind onto pen and paper, it's really relieving. And you'll look at it, and there'll be some things where, this is something to do. And there's other things where it's like, why am I even worrying about this? And so I find that to be really effective, just brain dumping. The third thing what I do, and by the way, this is in no particular order, but I find doing it in this order really helps me. But the third thing I like to do is I like to basically change my state. And essentially what that basically means is I like to get out of my environment, and I also like to change my mind and change how my body feels. And typically the most effective thing I found is exercising. There's a quote by Einstein, something along the lines of, we can't solve our problems in the same state in which we created them. And it's like something along the lines of thinking, like we can't think out of our problems with the same level of thinking which we created them with. And so basically, if you're in this overwhelmed state, and let's say you're really overwhelmed at home, and you're trying to tackle those problems in the same state in which you're thinking about those problems, it's really hard to actually do something about it. And there's actually a lot of science in terms of what part of the brain you're in when you're stressed, and what part of the brain you're in when you're actually objective and rational, and you're being an executive and you're governing yourself rather than freaking out, fight or flight, and the world's governing you. And so when you're overwhelmed, you're in this part of the brain called the amygdala, which is actually more like in the back part of your brain. It's known as like the monkey brain, the reptilian brain, things like that. And it's just basically very emotional, erratic decision making. With the executive center, the prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain, that's associated with thinking, objectivity, rational decision making, things like that. And so basically what you want to do is you want to get out of this part of the brain and get in this part of the brain. And the breathing definitely helps. Getting objective and thinking what's on my mind and getting it on pen and paper, the brain dump, that helps. But also changing your state, changing your physical state, which I found exercise really helps, is really effective. And so, like what I've done today is I've gotten out of my apartment and I've gone on a walk in nature. And I'm clearing my head, and I'm processing all the things which are on my mind. And so walking in nature is really effective for me. If I have the opportunity, I also love swimming, like hard exercise, and just to sort of release those endorphins and that dopamine because I've like achieved something, that really helps me too. And so essentially the third tip is change your state, change your environment. Like get out of the place and the physical state in which you were when you were thinking about your problems, when you're overwhelmed. Just do something to change that. And I find when you just change your environment and change your state, that just puts you in a much better position to actually think clearly and tackle those problems and actually do something about them. Fourth tip. So once I've sort of calmed myself down with breathing, I've done a brain dump, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to get out, I'm just going to go for a walk, I'm going to change my state, or I'm going to go for a swim or something like that. When I'm done and I come back, one affirmation which really helps me, this is something I just affirm to myself. Affirmations have got a lot of stigma. I think they have their place, because basically affirmations means making firm in one's mind. It's not like, I'm amazing, I'm incredible, I'm going to get through this. It's not like that. It's more of like a grounded, objective statement, which, you know, incorporates both sides of like good and bad sort of thing. You're not being too one-sided or fantasizing, I'm going to be a millionaire and not do anything about it. It's nothing like that. It's just more so statements I make to myself to make something firm in my mind. And when I get overwhelmed, what typically just automatically pops in my head, because I've affirmed this to myself a lot, is the affirmation, I am adaptable. The reason why I affirm I'm adaptable to myself is because stress, I learned this from my mentor, his name's Dr. John DeMartini. Distress, is an inability to adapt to a changing environment. So typically, when you're overwhelmed, there's lots of change, there's lots of things which have happened recently, and the environment, your life has changed in a certain way. Typically something negative has happened and it's come into your life, or maybe something positive which you had has gone, and you feel like you're missing something positive. Something's happened and your environment, your situation has changed. Now, if you just sit in that and then you let all these things happen, all these changes happen, you're just sitting there and you're just sort of, you can't really do anything about it. You feel incapacitated and you're sort of procrastinating, and then you're distracting yourself with immediate gratifications to sort of, seek the pleasure to avoid the pain. And you're not tackling those things. You're not being adaptable. That's why you're basically overwhelmed. And that's overwhelmed when you're just sitting in it. That's kind of like you've got your fight, you've got your flight, and you've got your freeze response. When it comes to overwhelm and you're sitting in that, that's kind of like you basically freezing. It's like, oh, I can't do anything about it. So the affirmation, I am adaptable, basically what that's saying is to myself is, I change when my life changes. When there's something which has happened to me, for me, something negative I've gained or something positive I've lost, if I'm just sitting with it, then it's just going to make things worse. I'm going to get more distressed. But when I do something about it, I adapt to that change, I'm not stressed, I'm not as distressed, I'm not as overwhelmed. And so I just find that affirmation, I am adaptable, all it really helps me to do is help me realize that I've got to do something here. I've got to do something to adapt to this change. Because if I'm saying I'm adaptable, it means I do things to change when my environment changes. I hope that makes sense, but it just makes my identity clear in terms of I'm someone who doesn't sit in this, who sits in this overwhelm and this distress and this huge to-do list. I'm someone who takes action, and I do something about this list I've got, the brain dump, because I am adaptable. I adapt to my environment when it changes, and that just really helps me get into action. And that's the last tip. It's once I've basically got this list, what I do is, I don't try and do all of it at once. I look at the list, and some things, they're urgent. They've got to be done sooner rather than later. Some things are a high priority and some things are a really low priority. And, some things can be done really quickly. It's just like a 2-minute, 3-minute, 5-minute thing, like just responding to someone who I've not responded to on a text. Really easy. Or they could be really big tasks and they need to be chunked down. They need to be chunked down into more bite-sized steps. And so the last tip is basically doing something. You are adaptable. You've gone through all these things in your life, and lots of things have happened and changed in your life, and you've overcome them. You've adapted to those changes, and you're here right now watching this video. And so in the state of overwhelm, you are adaptable, and you can do these things which is on your plate. But you want to basically be smart. You don't want to try and do all of it at once. You want to basically prioritize this list based on what's the highest priority, what's most urgent, or what can be done right now. And basically just start on one thing. What's the one thing on that list where, yep, that makes sense to do first, based on priority, urgency, or how much time it's going to take you. And that's up to you to decide, but to start with one thing and get it done. And when you get it done, you're going to feel good. There's going to be a sense of achievement, but also this list you've got is smaller. And, either try and just do one thing a day, or, if you do one thing and you're like, you know what, yep, I'm going to do the next thing, then great, do that. But just focus on just doing one thing at a time. Don't try and overwhelm yourself. Just like an elephant, you've got this big elephant, how am I going to eat this all? And you're overwhelmed. But if you chunk it down into little pieces and you're just trying to eat one bite at a time, if you just have that mentality, like I'm just going to stick with it, I'm just going to do one bite at a time, and eventually that elephant's going to be eaten. It's the same thing with whatever's on your plate, whatever's been on your mind, and you've now hopefully brain dumped. But that's basically it. That's basically 5 things I do, which really helps me whenever I'm overwhelmed. So just as a quick recap, the first thing I basically do is breathing. Breathe through my nose. I calm down my breathing. When I calm down my breath, I calm down my mind. That just helps me center myself as quickly as possible. Second thing I do is I get out a pen and pad and I do a brain dump. So I just get everything on my mind, out of my mind, onto a piece of paper. Third thing I basically do is I change my state. So go on a walk, get in nature, go for a swim. Doing some kind of physical activity really helps me, but it's just basically getting out of the environment in which I'm thinking about the problems, but also trying to change my mind in terms of the state in which I was thinking about those problems. I try and change that state, because you can't solve those problems in which with the same level of thinking in which you used to create them. So change your state. Fourth thing is, once you've done that, you're feeling better, you feel like you've changed your state, is just affirming to yourself that you're adaptable, that you can handle this, you can overcome this, and you are someone who adapts to your changing environment. Which basically means, the fifth thing is, you do things to change. It's not like life changes and you just sit there and you're like, oh, I don't like this. You're adaptable. You do something about your life, your environment when it changes. And that's how you survive. That's how you get through it. And the fifth thing is just prioritizing your list based on priority, urgency, or how much time it takes you to do those things, and just do one thing at a time to start ticking off those things. And I guarantee you, if you do 1 or 2 combination or all of these things, whether it's in the order I've done it or just, whatever feels most resonant to you, if you do these things, I guarantee it's going to really help you whenever you get overwhelmed. So that's the video. If you like this video, please give it a like. This really helps my channel and it helps the algorithm push it out to more people. So help me help others. Also, if you like this video and you want to watch more videos like this whenever they get released, consider hitting the subscribe button as well. And lastly, I'd love to know, what tip did you find most useful in this video? Whatever that is, leave a comment down below. But thank you for watching if you've gone this far. I really appreciate you. And I will see you in the next video.